I'm here today with Carl Colby, who is the director of a new film called The Man Nobody Knew. It's a biography of his father, William Colby, who was the legendary CIA spymaster, director of the CIA, and quite a public figure who was embroiled in many of the controversies around the agency going back to the 70s. Let's get right into it. Carl, why did you decide to make this film about your father?
You know, I'd always made profiles as a filmmaker. I did profiles of people like Frank Gehry and Willem de Kooning, and you'd think, well, why didn't I do a profile of my dad? But you know, when you would come to very personal questions or anything more substantive than whatever the flavor of the week was, he would just sort of put up a shield and say, well, that's your department, friend. You know, I don't go into those sort of treacherous emotional waters. So I was always a bit frustrated and didn't do it. And then he died, and a few years later I was watching the coverage of 9/11 2 hours after the towers fell, and Wolf Blitzer asked James Baker, well, how did this happen? And Baker said, I traced this back directly to the CIA hearings with Church and Pike in the 70s when Colby basically revealed all the family jewels, and the CIA's ability to do clandestine activities just collapsed. I was kind of stunned. I thought, God, there's relevance. And then 2 weeks later I see pictures of CIA operatives wearing beards and turbans and riding horses and camels with the Northern Alliance, and I thought, well, that looks like OSS. So I thought, well, maybe there's a story here. And now that he's gone, maybe I can approach it from a different way.
Did you know that your father was a spy when you were growing up, when you were a kid?
It was pretty funny. I used to think he just worked for the embassy, and I was on the diving board of the Cercle Sportif in Saigon, which was sort of a fun club we'd all go to. And a friend of mine on the diving board said, you know, your dad's a spy. I said, nah, he works for the embassy. And he said, no, he's CIA. And he jumped off into the pool. And that night I asked my dad, I said, well, you know, my friend Derek said, you work for CIA, or are you a spy or something? And he goes, you know, let's just keep that our little secret. And from then on, I felt like I was part of the team. You know, I had a job to do. He had a mission, and I had a job, which was to protect him and the rest of us.
Do you think he went over to the dark side at some point?
I think he knew the dark side. I think he also had a great capacity to absorb pain and to inflict pain. One of his best friends, Stan Tempko, who used to run Covington and Burling here, was his best man in Columbia, and said that you could be talking to him like this, and you could be sawing off his left arm, and he wouldn't flinch. I think he didn't go to the dark side in the sense of became evil or embraced evil. I think he got down and fought the way the enemy was fighting him, and no holds barred.
So if it required taking people out, so be it.
Senator Symington is grilling my father for his confirmation hearings as CIA director, and asks him, well, how do you characterize the Phoenix program? You were basically implementing the program, and there's targets, and he said, no, and how did you count it? How did you quantify it? He said, you know, so many people eliminated. He said, no, not eliminated, killed. There's no euphemism about it. That's a direct quote. So it's going to take you aback a little bit. You know, you're talking to somebody who has no qualms about.
This was war.
But this is war, exactly.
What were the family jewels? This was something that came to be known, and during the hearings before Congress, after he became director, I guess in 1973, there had been a lot of disclosures about CIA activities in the Nixon, before Nixon resigned. And the result of these hearings was that a lot of activities of the CIA, which had remained secret, became disclosed, and your father was very much a part of that process of disclosing these secrets. What did we learn?
I think what we learned is what we've been up to since the early 50s, with a veneer of you know, lend-lease and care packages and the 2 handshakes, and that what was going on underneath all this was a lot of skullduggery and a lot of attempted coups. And my producer, David Johnson, went to Yale and showed up at one of those 8 o'clock sort of breakfast meetings with the dignitary, and the dignitary was my father, and they said, well, this is the former director of the CIA, and the Yale students immediately raised their hand. How many people did you assassinate? And he said, well, we never succeeded in assassinating anybody, but we tried 16 times.
At the end of the day, what did you learn about your father?
I think he was a soldier. He believed in authority, and he believed in America. And even though he probably had one of the bleakest, harshest views of the world that I'd ever seen, he had this kind of boyish sort of enthusiasm for life and for America. And he believed in the character of people. And so no matter all the darkness and the things I'll never know about, I think he was a good man.
You think that he thought America could make the world a better place?
Absolutely. I think he just unqualified thought that America. He thought we were overreaching, though, by the time he got on in age in the 70s. He thought we were overreaching. He became an advocate for disarmament, and which now William Perry and George Shultz and many people his generation are, all bets, all money to the front. Let's just disarm.
Right.
There's that famous quote. What is it that when you're Clemenceau says that if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart, and if you're not conservative when you're old, you have no head. But I think he felt he'd done so much fighting. There'd been so much war. I interviewed Senator Inouye, who you probably know, who the oldest serving senator now, and obviously a Medal of Honor winner, and lost his arm. And he said, your father and I, we knew blood. And it was a chilling thing to say, and I think that's why both my father and Inouye don't have a braggadocio idea about war. They know the cost. Dissimilar to what we'd heard in the last administration. Full steam ahead.